welcome to the Bearded Architect Designs channel. I'm Alex, and today we are building the long-awaited longboard build. This is a skateboard. I built this not too long ago with the parts that just came in. It's basically a skateboard. It's pretty much the same thing almost. But yeah, the only difference between a skateboard and a longboard is really the trucks and the wheels, and maybe the shape of the board, but the board altogether is just something to stand on. But I have been waiting for weeks for these parts to come in, and I am so stoked to get to it. Today, I'm going to actually build my own longboard, and you guys get to come along for the ride with me. So, let's get to it. So this is going to be a plywood board, so it's not going to be a hardwood board. So it's going to have a little flex to it. But I just had 3 stacks of 3/16 ply through there, glued it down, and kind of created a mold for it. It's not really an actual mold for like usual skateboards. It's a do-it-yourself kind of mold, so you guys probably have all the scraps for it. Also, you're going to be using a lot of clamps, so keep that in mind. But there are alternatives to making your own clamps, which are a lot cheaper than the ones I have. So I'll show you how to do that as well. But I'm going to show you definitely for sure how to make sure you get that slight curve, giving the board its rails so you can have actual real nice movements when you're trying to skate. Also, I did have issues since these are actually skateboard trucks. They actually don't have the height that I need. So when I do really hard turns, the wheels rub up against the board itself. So I need to make sure that the board does not have to have any contact with the wheels, have no contact with the new board I'm gonna make. Also, the trucks I got for the other board, or from actual longboard, are actually 10 inches. These are 9 inches. So definitely gonna be some workarounds there, but yeah, let's get to it. Alright, so first you'll need 2 foot by 4 foot plywood that's 3/16 inch thick. I have one piece here that's full, another piece that's ripped in half, and I used it for the skateboard that you just saw me holding earlier in the video. Then we will need all of our skate parts. So there are the longboard trucks that are 10 inches, they're gull wings. I paid about $50 for 2, or the set of 2 of these. You'll need some bearings. Got some reds. These are kind of the quality standard that I've been told about by many people. Then get some wheels. Usually the bigger the wheels, the softer the ride. Also the softer the wheel as well. You won't be hitting those cracks or bumps and falling off the board. And then just as an optional, if you really like having your feet really gripped onto the board, you can get some of this. I couldn't find any grip tape pieces longer than 33 inches, so this will have to do. And then just some nuts and bolts to hold all the trucks in. I got all these pieces at Ace Hardware for, I'd say, like $5. Yeah, these are just inch bolts with the little rubber stop nuts that go with them. Yeah, you can just go to like an Ace Hardware or any True Value store, and they will have all these parts for you on a back wall. You can just pick them all out whenever you want. For tools, you'll need to use the table saw a few times throughout this project, so a table saw is required. You will also need every clamp in your arsenal. These are all the clamps, all the big clamps I own. There's also an alternative I'll show you guys later in a diagram. You'll also need a bunch of scrap, and specifically 1/2 inch plywood to base everything together. You'll need a lot of like just scraps and spare ends just to kind of put together the clamp down. There are alternatives to kind of avoiding all of these scrap pieces. If you just want to get a 2x4 and some carriage bolts, that is also an option. But for the sake of documentation, I'm going to show you how I did it. Some more miscellaneous tools you'll need are definitely a skate tool, screwdriver, crescent wrench, center punch, some drill bits, a jigsaw, and definitely a router to kind of round those edges off with a roundover bit that I have shown on here. You'll also need a palm sander. If you don't have one of these, some sandpaper and some elbow grease will do just fine. Optionally, a drill press will help you get straighter holes for your hardware, but a drill will be fine if you don't have one of these. I'm cracking open a fresh new set of drill bits for this project, so cleaner bits will help, but you'll need specifically a 3/16, and maybe if you want to have a little bit more precision, an 1/8 inch bit as well. And lastly, for finishing, you will need all three of these items here. Danish oil just kind of brings out that color in the wood and makes it look very vibrant. Some multi-surface black paint just for the design I'm going to make on the art. You can use like markers, whatever you want. And some Hells Inspire urethane to finish the top and give it that sealant that it needs to not have scratches. All right, first things first, I'm ripping my 2-foot piece to 10-inch, two 10-inch pieces and having a 4-inch offcut that I can just toss. Then I am kind of dry fitting everything. So now I'm dry fitting the board, just kind of picking which pieces are going to be the top, which is going to be the bottom, which is going to be the middle. I decided to have the straightest one in the middle just to kind of give it that rigidity, but also have those two on the outside just to kind of make the glue up a little bit easier by focusing most of the clamp effort on the ends of the board. For the clamp up, this is probably one of the most stressful things any woodworker will experience, so please excuse me while I panic during this shoot. This also just so happened to be the opportunity or the moment that all my neighbors decided they wanted to talk to me in the middle of a glue up. So yeah, this is pretty stressful. So you just kind of want to dry fit and lay everything out just so it's ready for the clamp up, and then also get everything ready for the clamp up. To just kind of avoid having to show you everything I did, I'm just going to pull up a diagram and show you how I did everything. Usually when people build longboards or skateboards, they have a press mold that's shaped exactly how they want to shape the board and everything. But for an alternative here, we could just use ends like scrap pieces of either 3/4 or 1/2 inch pieces of strips of wood to kind of run down the length of the wood on the outside, just about, and bring it in about 1 inch and on both sides, and then have that press on top with the cross members putting pressure down onto the board itself. As an alternative, you could just make these homemade do-it-yourself clamps. Basically, there's just two 2x4s, roughly around 14 to 16 inches in length, with some holes drilled in them, just for the with carriage bolts to run through them, and some washers with some hex nuts just to tighten them up. And you make 2 or 3, maybe 4 of those, and you got yourself a perfectly good clamping system. So here's how my clamp up went. It wasn't the greatest, but I think it got the job done and made sure the glue was spread throughout and got the right shape of the board. So after about a day, you could wait longer if you wanted to. You can start unclamping, but I waited a little over 24 hours, and I think that is sufficient enough time to let sit. So after I took off all the clamps, I just gave it a quick inspection and made sure that on the edge of the board that none of the plies were separating from each other. Back to the table saw, basically I'm just ripping this piece of wood down to 9 1/4 inches wide, just to kind of give it a uniform width. That way it's easier to kind of measure the middle out, so for placing the trucks and all the parts for it. So I ripped it to 9 1/4 inches in width, and then for the length I'm using a crosscut sled just to get it to the 39 inches that I want. So I cut off the one of the ends that looked kind of bad, and then I cut the other end to the length I needed it to be. After that, I basically measured from center point to the other center point of the board and just drew a line down the middle. It's okay because you can draw this with pencil because you can erase it, and then if erasing doesn't work, then you can just get some sandpaper and sand it out. It's best to have these guidelines just be able to shape the board as well as placing the trucks. When placing your trucks, I used some scrap pieces of wood just to kind of reference like how much deflection there would be in the board itself, or in skating terms, some flex, so that this could be a good cruising board and be a soft, gentle ride. But basically, I use these blocks just to kind of mimic how I would be distributing my weight onto the board and how much flex it would give, just basically trying to get the placement of my footing as well as the placement of the trucks. After I got the placement of my trucks, I marked all the holes for the hardware and used this to also shape my board just to avoid having the wheels be directly under the board. So whenever I'm doing a hard turn, the wheels won't be rubbing up against the board at all, even without the riser decks underneath the trucks. I'm going with a surfboard type of shape board just because I like the way it looks aesthetically. And so I only drew one half of it, and I'll show you how to do the other half. So basically draw one side of the board, then I use some trace paper to trace it out. Was a little windy, so I decided to tape it down. The tape will also kind of help you keep everything in place without things shifting on you. So what I did was just trace the board shape from the one side, took the trace paper off, flipped it to the other side, upside down, and just used the pressure from my pencil to imprint the graphite onto the other side of the board. So that way it has a symmetrical two-sided board. There are multiple ways to do this too. If you have a printer, you could just print multiple sheets of the board and have a rough cutout of what you want already printed. You won't have to do this whole flip flop onto one side and make it symmetrical on the other. It would just be a symmetrical stencil that you would have. But for me, I'm just kind of going a little bit more of a creative route, just something that I thought was a little out of the box. Before you start cutting the shape of your board, you want to drill some holes for your hardware for that'll hold your trucks in. Right now, what I'm doing is laying down some tape to where those holes will be, especially on the bottom side, so that you don't get any tear out and messes up your cool graphic on the bottom. And then basically on a drill press, I am putting an 1/8 inch bit to kind of give it a pilot hole to start. So I'm center punching that just to make sure that's right on center, and then just running the 1/8 inch bit in all 8 of the holes. And once you have all of those holes made, you can switch to a 3/16 bit, which is the size of the hardware. And for that, I also tape off the top so you don't just rip out the wood on the top. And I just use a drill because having it on the drill press is a little hard and awkward to get it perfectly on there. And since there's already pilot holes, it's going to do its job. Once you got your holes drilled out, you want to jigsaw out the shape of your board. Basically, just kind of cut it out as best you can. We'll go over the rough edges in a little bit. I'll show you what to do about that. But basically, you just follow that stencil line. And then once you get that all cut out, you want to give it a light sanding just so that router bearing has a smooth surface to run along. And then you break out the router and you give it a nice round over edge. You want to do this on both sides. That way you just have a nice smooth surface without having any jagged edges that might cut you up or give you some splinters. But basically, yeah, just want to round over edge both of them just so you have a nice board to hold and it doesn't cut your fingers when you're carrying it. So I think I really got excited about this project mainly because it wasn't only a showcase of my craftsmanship, but it would also be a display of my artistic side just because of that cool graphic that everyone wants to design on the bottom. So right now I am just kind of tracing out what I'm going to paint later on of what I want. So basically I'm just drawing the shape of Oregon, my currently home state, surrounded by a circular saw blade and a pine tree in the background with the roots on the bottom. I was born in Texas, grew up in the Midwest, and moved to the Pacific Northwest because I've always felt like I had a calling to this place. I can't really tell what it is, but I like the woods, I like the mountains, and I just love it where I live now. And so now I am laying down on both sides some Danish oil, which kind of brings out the color in the wood. As you can see, it is very vibrant now. I would avoid putting it over pencil though. I recently just found out that, or actually in practice, I found out that it actually removes pencil marks. So that might be an issue when you're trying to use it as your stencil. But now I'm just kind of painting out the pencil sketch that I made. I'm not a super great painter. Like I honestly should have went with markers or something like that just because the stroke of the brush is a little hard to work with, especially towards non-organic materials like the circular saw. But with the tree, it was pretty nice to have that brush stroke that kind of made it feel like a real organic tree. The roots were also kind of a little chunky and a little hard to draw out, but overall I was really excited and happy with how this entire piece came out. After finishing the painting, I just went over completely with the Danish oil. And now, after you let the Danish oil dry for a couple of minutes, you can go over it with some polyurethane. I'm just using some spray on just so I don't have that running effect that would be if I had to apply it through a brush. But just kind of get an even coat. I wouldn't go too heavy just because it's going to start getting runny. Give it about 3 coats and wait about 12 hours between each one. Now it's finally time to start installing hardware. So now I'm going to show you guys how to get the bearings onto the wheels and how to get the wheels onto the trucks. This is probably the easiest step in the entire building process of building this longboard. So what you want to do is just in all of your wheels, you just want to press those bearings by hand as best you can. They're going to be a real tight fit and it's going to be kind of hard to get them in, but I do have an easy solution to fix that and get them in pretty easily without having to get a super expensive bearing press. So when installing the bearings into the wheels, I just use a little piece of leftover PVC that I have because you want to avoid hitting that red part because that's where the ball bearings are and you don't want to crush those because those are what causes the wheel to spin, and if you crush those then the wheel won't spin. I just use a hammer and line up the silver part of the bearing or the outside part of the bearing with the PVC and just hammer it in. Once you get the bearings on enough, you can tighten them up with the skate tool until it won't spin, and then just back up the nut just a little bit, that way it does spin. Do this 4 more times and you should be all set for lining up the trucks onto the board. For this part, you'll need your crescent wrench, your screwdriver, and all your little bits and bobs hardware. It's probably easiest to start your bolt and nut by just hand tightening it, just kind of getting it onto the threading and it holding itself in. And then you want to use the crescent wrench to hold the nut while you screw in from the bottom, or technically the top side. You'll be screwing in the bolt until it's flush with the top surface of the deck. Here's how that installment looks like from the top. So you just put the nut onto the threading and just hold the crescent wrench there, and from the bottom you just screw it in until it's flush with the deck surface. So I'm loving how this board is riding. I'm really quite proud of how it came out. So this project for me has been a benchmark of really how much I can make and what I can really do. And if you like what you saw here, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, you might be wondering if I can make you a board. If you're really interested, you can reach out to me through my website, through Instagram, Facebook. I even have my email up on social media you can reach me by. But yeah, if you really want something from me, just hit me up. I should be pretty open for commissions and anything you'd like me to make for you. But really, building things is just kind of what I've always wanted to do, and I'm so happy that you guys are able to join that experience with me and I'm able to share it with you. We'll see if this takes off, so this is what I had mostly planned, but if you guys want to leave in the comments about what you want me to see next, I have a whole list of ideas, but I want to hear from you guys first and see what you guys want to see me make, because literally I got plenty of ideas, but really this channel is about entertaining you guys as well as, entertaining me, and I feel like that could be a two-way street. So if you guys want to just leave comments, that all is awesome. It also helps my channel out so much, helps me out. But I'm Alex from Bearded Architect Designs, and I'll see you in the next build.